Grandpa went hunting in the mountains and saw a female dragon pinned down by a snapping turtle. Seeing this, Grandpa raised his hunting rifle, planned to take down both with a single shot. Unexpectedly, the female dragon spoke human words begging him for help. She promised that if he saved her she would repay him in the future. Think about the fact that I wasn't born yet. Grandpa shot the snapping turtle dead. The female dragon then said, "I'm gravely injured and need time to heal. Help me recover and I will bless your grandson with great fortune." Hearing this, Grandpa agreed to the strange request. He decided to bet on this twist of fate. At first the family thought it was just a wild tale Grandpa made up. But 10 years later, on the day my mother was giving birth, a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. A shadow of a giant dragon rose from beneath our ancestral home. Seeing this, Grandpa was overjoyed, imagining great blessings for me. But after the dragon's shadow disappeared, a once-in-a-century storm followed. The entire village fled to higher ground. But my family was trapped because of my mother's difficult labor. Everyone in the house was extremely anxious. Only Grandpa stayed silent, standing at the door staring into the distance as if waiting for something. Around 10 p.m. that night, my mother was screaming in pain, but I still hadn't been born. Even the midwife believed I was a stillborn. Just as hope was running out, a lightning bolt tore through the dark sky. With a thunderous roar, I was finally born. But before the family could celebrate, the door was slammed open with a loud bang. A pitch-black coffin floated in with the flood. It quietly rested in the courtyard. Everyone was drenched in cold sweat. But Grandpa burst out laughing. He said, "This is a water coffin gift. It means this boy will be wealthy and prosperous." Then Grandpa dragged the coffin into his room. Time flew and I turned 5. When my parents planned to have a second child, they made me sleep with Grandpa. That's when I discovered Grandpa worshipped the coffin every day. A few days after I moved in, Grandpa gave me a piece of candy on the condition that I marry the coffin. Furthermore, he also began teaching me ancient feng shui techniques from an old book. This training continued for over 10 years. When I turned 10, Grandpa's time finally came. In his last days on Earth, he often stayed alone in his room, muttering strange things to the air, besides me occasionally coming and going. Only the coffin remained in the room. The day before Grandpa passed, he called me to his side and gave me 2 tasks. The first was that after his death, I must bury him in that very coffin. He warned that someone might try to steal it, and I must guard it. The second task was to take care of my wife. I had to protect her at all costs. I was stunned. Who would bother stealing this broken old coffin? And as for the second task, it made even less sense. I was an 18-year-old bachelor with no wife in sight. Just as I was about to ask for clarity, Grandpa breathed his last. My father, a very dutiful son, immediately agreed to fulfill Grandpa's wishes. Together with my uncle, we pried open the coffin. But when we opened it, everyone was stunned. Inside was no skeleton, but the lifelike body of a young woman. Not only was she untouched by decay, but she was stunningly beautiful. I almost couldn't control myself after one glance. Marrying such a woman, I'd gladly give up 10 years of my life. But before I could think further, a strange fragrance wafted out from the coffin. Before long, the entire village was filled with this scent. It was a legendary aroma called Hu Shang. Grandpa's ancient books had described it in detail. Hu Shang spreads for miles, drawing spirits and ghosts, making thousands worship. At that moment, I finally understood Grandpa's 2 tasks. The second one was the real challenge. I looked at the villagers drawn by the scent, and my mind was in turmoil. Burning it all might be the best option. But then I remembered Grandpa's words. He once told me that this scent, also known as Dan Shang, meant that the woman's body had cultivated an inner elixir. She must be of great significance, too valuable to destroy. At that moment, the whole family was anxious about what to do with the woman's body. Nobody knew the right course of action. I took a deep breath and suggested we move her to the old family house. Our ancestral home was halfway up the mountain, far from the village. I volunteered to take care of her there. After a brief hesitation, my parents agreed. They sent the onlookers away. I wrapped the woman's body in black cloth and carried her to the old house. The house was in disrepair but provided some shelter from the elements. I found a room and placed her on the bed. The wind must have blown over her on the way, because the scent had faded a lot. After setting her down, I prepared to leave, knowing Grandpa still needed to be buried. But as I reached the door, I felt uneasy about leaving her on such a rough bed. I returned, found a clean sheet from the cabinet, and started replacing the old one. Since I had to lift her, we inevitably made some physical contact. When we were face to face, I froze for a moment. It wasn't that I had improper thoughts, but I had a strange feeling. It felt like her eyes were open under the cloth. The thought made my heart skip a beat. Surely it was impossible in broad daylight. After a moment of hesitation, I carefully lifted the cloth. Even though it was my second time seeing her, I was still stunned by her beauty. Without makeup she looked like a delicate work of art. Her slightly curled lips hinted at a mysterious smile. I didn't dare breathe loudly. Only after seeing her closed eyes did I finally exhale in relief. But as soon as I covered her again, the strange feeling returned. This was far too eerie. I couldn't shake the unease. All I wanted was to finish and go back to bury Grandpa. Just as I reached the door I heard a soft thud behind me. The sound nearly made my legs give out. I turned around to see a book had fallen off the bed. It seemed to have slipped from the woman's body. At that very moment, I felt as if her head under the cloth had turned to face me. I gasped in shock. Quickly I stepped over to pick up the book. Without looking at it closely, I tucked it back under her waist and hurried out. After locking the door I sniffed the air nervously. The fragrance of the Hu Shan had faded significantly. With such strong mountain winds, it wouldn't take long for the scent to dissipate completely. And if it didn't, whoever wanted the body could take it. That was why I moved her to this place. Afterward I returned home to arrange Grandpa's funeral. The funeral was unexpectedly peaceful. Grandpa was buried just as he had wished inside the old coffin. As the relatives and friends slowly left, my mind wandered back to the woman's body. Late at night I couldn't sleep no matter how hard I tried. So I quietly grabbed the swords Grandpa left, the gold coin sword and the peach wood sword, and headed to the old house. Just as I was nearing the house, I suddenly noticed a group of people walking up the path. They were headed straight for the old house. I quickly crouched down and hid in the bushes. In no time the group reached the house. When I saw them clearly I gasped. These weren't people, they were stiff-faced paper effigies painted in red and green. As they got closer I realized they were carrying a small bridal sedan chair. A weasel jumped out of the sedan. It looked remarkably human-like. It wore a groom's outfit with a red flower on its chest. Its small bead-like eyes glowed green. The creature was dressed festively. Seeing this I understood at once. This beast was here for the woman's body. Its intentions were obvious. The way it squeezed its legs together in excitement made my blood boil. The weasel walked up to the door and bowed deeply. Then with a wicked smile it said, "Dear little lady, your husband has come to take you back to the mountains." Hearing it speak human words shocked me. Clearly this weasel had some magical abilities. I wondered if I could fight it head-on. But in my hesitation, the weasel strutted eagerly toward the house. It looked so smug as it reached the door. Images of the woman's lifelike face flashed through my mind. This creature wouldn't care if she was dead or alive. In his hands she would surely be desecrated. Anger surged within me. I grabbed a rock and threw it at him. Just as the creature was about to step inside, the rock hit the back of his head sending him tumbling. But he quickly scrambled to his feet. His small beady eyes glowing angrily under the moonlight. He scanned the area and roared furiously. "Who dares attack your Lord Huang?" I ducked back into the bushes holding my breath like an ostrich. But as soon as the rock left my hand regret hit me. Provoking this creature would surely bring trouble later. Just as I was cursing my actions, I felt an itch on my neck as if a small brush was tickling me. I looked up and found the creature perched above me, his paw tracing circles on my neck. "Oh no," I muttered. Acting on instinct, I pulled the peach wood sword from my waist and slashed at him. The sword glowed with golden light as it swung. The weasel's eyes widened in shock. He leapt backward just in time, narrowly avoiding the blow. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I charged forward and kicked him hard in the head. He flew 7 meters away, rolling on the ground. He got up slowly, glaring at me with hatred in his beady eyes. "Do you even know who I am, kid?" he snarled. "Everyone around here knows me, Huang Lao San. You'll pay for ruining my plans." I was just as furious. How could a living person fear a weasel? Without another word I pulled out the gold coin sword and charged at him, slashing wildly. Seeing my ferocity, Huang Lao San began to panic. He twisted his body around and released a cloud of yellow smoke from his rear. I wasn't expecting that. The stench hit me so hard tears streamed down my face. Taking advantage of my distraction, Huang Lao San ran uphill. He looked back and shouted smugly, "You're dead, kid. Even the gods can't save you now." I was too dizzy to respond. By the time I recovered, Huang Lao San had disappeared into the depths of the 10,000 mountains. Under the moonlit sky, I dared not pursue him any further. The river flows endlessly, carrying corpses and coffins. The 10,000 mountains hide too many dark secrets. Otherwise that coffin wouldn't have floated into our courtyard. After calming down a bit I opened the door. Seeing that the woman's body was still there I sighed in relief. I cursed under my breath, "What a troublemaker. That weasel almost gassed me to death because of you." To prevent him from coming back, I decided to lie down next to her. After all, this bed was the cleanest spot in the house. Though I lay down, my mind was still restless. Before I knew it, the scent of Hu Shang began to thicken again. I inhaled it without thinking. The scent turned into a warm stream, spreading through my entire body. I immediately sensed something was off. As I tried to roll over, I was horrified to find I couldn't move. Not only that, even my eyelids were too heavy to lift. And as the scent grew thicker, my mouth became dry and parched. A wave of heat surged through my entire body. It felt like a fire was burning in my lower abdomen. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I felt slender hands slip inside my shirt. What the hell? No matter how brave I was, fear started creeping in. I began regretting everything. Why did I lie down next to her? If she came back to life, she might suck the life out of me. Just as they say, what you fear most often comes true. I felt a face press against my neck. My entire body tensed up instantly, goosebumps rising all over me. Then something cold and soft pressed against my lips. What's happening now? Is she going to bite my lips instead of my neck? I was puzzled, but the cool sensation felt surprisingly pleasant. Unfortunately, it only lasted a few seconds. Cold lips soon left mine. It seemed she had lain back down. Did she spare me because we performed the wedding rites? Could she actually desire men too? My mind was swirling with chaotic thoughts and soon I drifted off to sleep. Before I knew it I was sound asleep. The next morning I woke with a start. I took several deep breaths, immediately turning my head toward the woman. She was still lying on the bed completely unmoved. I scratched my head awkwardly. So it was just a dream. But when I got off the bed, I noticed something strange. She had shifted slightly farther away from me. It was as if she was disgusted by me. Was it because of the weasel's stench from last night? I inhaled sharply in surprise. This wasn't the behavior of a lifeless corpse. I recalled carrying her up the mountain. Her limbs had been soft, not stiff like a dead body. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to check. I needed to know if she had a heartbeat. Carefully I reached toward her chest. Her body felt cold but soft through her clothes. After a long time I confirmed, no heartbeat. Reluctantly I pulled my hand away. To my surprise my hand smelled like milk. Embarrassed my face burned. It felt like I'd done something wrong. I didn't dare linger any longer. Before leaving I grabbed the ancient book from under her. As I left the old house guilt gnawed at me. It felt like I'd done something unspeakable. I was uneasy. I had the sense that someone was watching me. Sure enough, after walking a few steps, I realized I wasn't imagining things. There really was a pair of eyes on me. It was a small weasel following me. I pretended not to notice and kept walking home. Once I was home I pulled out the book. I wanted to see what was inside. But as soon as I opened the first page, I was stunned. It was the second volume of Grandpa's book. After the shock came deep confusion. Could Grandpa have been connected to the coffin? Or had he hidden the book inside the coffin? But after reading through it, I knew Grandpa couldn't have hidden it. The second volume contained a method for cultivating energy. Without that energy, the techniques in the first volume were useless. Grandpa had spent his life as an amateur feng shui master. Precisely because he lacked this energy. Given Grandpa's obsession with the first volume, there's no way he would have hidden the second volume if he had it. Could it be that Grandpa had been to the 10,000 mountains before? Maybe he encountered the woman or her kind. Or perhaps her kin gave him the first volume. Unfortunately Grandpa is gone now and I'll never know. I carefully read through the second volume again. But the content was cryptic and hard to understand. After a long time I still couldn't make sense of it. After lunch I sneaked into the chicken coop and caught a big rooster. I also grabbed some thread my mom uses for sewing shoes. Then I quietly returned to the old house. On the way a weasel was still trailing me. I felt smug as I held the rooster in my hand. They say no man can resist temptation. And neither can a weasel resist stealing a chicken. When I reached the old house I slaughtered the rooster in the yard. I deliberately splattered the blood everywhere. The scent of fresh blood made the weasel's eyes gleam with excitement. But I wasn't after just one small weasel. I wanted to catch them all. If you don't kill the snake it'll come back to bite you. Then I set traps around the woman's bed. The traps were simple snares, perfect for catching small animals. As night fell I divided the cooked chicken into pieces, and placed them in front of each trap. But even by 10 o'clock, the weasel hadn't made a move. Was Huang Lao San too scared to come back? Feeling smug I glanced at the woman's body. I needed to confirm once and for all if she was alive or dead. The best way was to check for a heartbeat. I reached out toward her chest again. This time I wouldn't stop until I was sure. Just then, there was a sudden knock at the door. Startled I yanked my hand away. I stared at the door cautiously. After a minute of silence I called out, "Who's there?" There was no response. I carefully drew the gold coin sword from my waist. Slowly I opened the door. But there was no one outside. Just as I was about to close the door, I looked down. There scattered at the entrance were 7 gold nuggets. Holy crap, gold. This stuff was worth a fortune. But I didn't pick up the gold nuggets. I knew that the mountain spirits held both gratitude and grudges. Weasels were no exception. They dig tunnels in the mountains for years, often sneaking into ancient tombs. They stash anything valuable they find, sometimes using it for revenge. If I took the gold, I'd fall into its trap. So I ignored it. Instead, I pulled out a cooked chicken leg and ate it deliberately at the door. Since Huang Lao San came for the woman's body, I uncovered her face and turned on the lights. I wanted to make sure he could see her clearly. Sure enough, as soon as I lifted the cloth from her face, I saw small green glimmers in the bushes. I counted 7 or 8 pairs of glowing eyes. It looked like the whole family had come. This time I could catch them all at once. I shut the door and turned off the lights, hiding behind the door to observe what would happen. Soon Huang Lao San appeared around the yard. Tonight he wasn't wearing his usual outfit. Instead he had on floral patterned pants. He circled the door a few times, moving sneakily toward the entrance. Just when I thought he would take the bait, he stopped suddenly. He waved his paw, and the smaller weasels rushed forward. One of them acted as a scout. The little weasel's eyes gleamed as it stared at the chicken pieces. Quickly jumped onto the windowsill after checking the area. One of them stepped directly into my trap, panicking and spinning in place. Seeing this, I prepared to pounce. But then Huang Lao San raised his tail toward the door. In a second, 3 streams of dark green smoke poured in through the crack. I quickly backed away, but I accidentally inhaled some of it. Dizziness hit me immediately. Ha ha! I heard Huang Lao San's sinister laughter outside. He pushed the door open slightly and stepped inside, moving with eerie grace. His sinister energy clouded my thoughts. Hallucinations began to feel more and more real. I was on the verge of falling into madness. Just then a warmth surged in my lower abdomen. A stream of energy began circulating through my body, instantly dispelling the hallucinations before my eyes. My mind became crystal clear. This was Tao energy. I rejoiced inwardly but didn't let it show. I pretended to still be in a daze, flailing my arms and swinging wildly around the room. You think you can take me on? You're too green. Huang Lao San laughed smugly. He didn't bother rescuing the smaller weasels, and instead leapt onto the woman's bed, admiring her like a priceless treasure. Then mimicking a human, he sat cross-legged beside her. He eagerly began inhaling the fragrance. With every breath, the woman's abdomen rose and fell in sync. Soon the Hu Shang filled the entire room. I watched in shock. It was clear now, this wasn't just fragrance. It was Dan Shang. A core essence like this was priceless to demons and spirits alike. If it stayed with me, it would surely lead to my death. Determined, I silently crept forward. Seizing the moment, I lunged and grabbed his throat. Let's see where you run now. Huang Lao San jolted awake, thrashing violently in my grip. But soon his struggle turned into terror. His eyes bulged in fear. I thought he was just scared of being caught. But then I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the woman. I glanced over and saw what had happened. In my haste, I had fallen halfway onto her. The black cloth covering her face was crumpled. Her exquisite face was now exposed. Her eyes were blood red. It was terrifying to look at. Quickly I freed a hand and pulled the black cloth over her face again. Huang Lao San was now trembling all over, forgetting to struggle. Seeing me cover the woman's face, it stammered, finally speaking. Tell me honestly, where did you get this woman? None of your business, I snapped. I grabbed it and walked toward the wooden block nearby. Next to it was the club I had prepared. Seeing my intention to smash its head in, Huang Lao San panicked. Wait kid, listen to me. If you let me go, I can save your life. Otherwise you can't afford to mess with that woman. Even 10 lives won't be enough for you. I didn't respond. Instead I slammed him onto the wooden block and sneered. She's my wife, what's the worst she could do? Kill me? Huang Lao San let out a mocking chuckle. Ignorance is bliss, he sneered. You think just calling her your wife makes it true? In 7 days you're a goner. 7 days? I froze. What do you mean? The club hovered mid-air in my hand. Sensing a chance, Huang Lao San urgently continued. In 7 days her inner core will. Before he could finish, his eyes widened in terror. He stared intently behind me. Fear locked his voice. You're trying to trick me again? I scoffed. Not this time. Without hesitation, I pressed his head against the block and swung the club. With one blow his eyes rolled back. His limbs twitched and he stopped breathing. I lifted the club, ready to take care of the smaller weasels, still bouncing around near the door and window. But as I turned around, my legs suddenly felt as heavy as lead.